Return of the Exiled, or Why Must I Be the Hero? By T.J. Stegaheis. Read by YOB. Dedicated to Kurt Reimert, whose stories inspired this work. Requiescat in pace.
Chapter 17. What is a Saurian? Late in the night following the interview, Smoke and Tanner crept into the pyramid. "This must be the My Pointy tomb referred to in the clues," said Tanner. "We must be quick," said Smoke. "While they mean to help, I don't think that they will tolerate us violating the tomb of an honored scholar and his friend." The gate into the pyramid was unlocked and unguarded, giving Smoke a bit of worry, but once inside, the layout was a simple hall with two sealed niches, each with a plaque above it bearing strange inscriptions. Tanner opened their lanterns a sliver so that they could see better. The furthest niche had a pagan name under the Saurian runes. Tanner pried open the cover on the niche, but the skeleton resting inside had no possessions. Disappointed, they resealed it. Then Smoke looked at the name plaque above the niche. He slipped his knife under the lower edge and found a catch in the center, which slid to the left, releasing the bottom of the plaque, and they easily lifted it off the wall. Behind was a small space with the sage's belongings: a decaying belt, dagger, small purse, a walking staff, and a pouch, which yielded up the fifth key of Payton and a scroll tube. Smoke handed the key and the tube to Tanner, and they refastened the plaque. Tanner stared a moment at the plaque. "So, this is where the Khan was finally buried," he said. "Everyone gets buried somewhere," replied Smoke, and blew a handful of dust at the wall to cover the signs of disturbance. "It had been a puzzle among my people what the fate of the Khan was. He just disappeared one day and was never seen again," said Tanner. "Apparently he had arranged with this Tatjek to be buried with him here in Charo." "It must have been a dangerous journey for an old man," said Smoke. The two quickly departed, making certain that they restored everything as it had been. Two saurians, perched in a tree at the edge of the graveyard, watched them leave. "Well," said one after the pair were out of sight, "there they go. I hope that Heket was right about those two." "We will know in the morning when we check the tomb," said his partner. "If they took anything other than the holy symbol, we can confront them then." That same night, in the Traveller's Inn, Windy was talking with a saurian sage about how a lady should think. The sage, named Shisa, told Windy that he was concerned about her killing rage, but could not help her bring it under control in the time that they had in which to work. He did spend a long time teaching her about the responsibilities of nobility and how to acquire the mindset and attitudes to help her fit into her title. Earlier that day, her sword had been sharpened and polished. The ring of Lady Spoven had been polished and sized for her by skilled saurian artisans. A saurian seamstress insisted on making a better set of travel clothes for her. She was still wearing the set she had purchased in Pan. Windy felt embarrassed at the attention, but was told that it was necessary and proper. The documents in Windy's parcel were all copied by saurian scribes and added to the royal library. The librarian expressed frustration that Smoke had not kept a copy of the military documents he had sold. However, since a copy existed in Luffa, she expected to obtain a copy for the royal library soon. For the rest of that day, and for the 2 following days, Shisa would be at her ear, speaking of things with which a noble lady should be concerned. "To be a noble or royal person is to be the expression of your people," he said. "All nobles must ultimately disregard their personal lives in favor of the lives of their lands and people. Therefore, the true kings will speak in the imperial 'we' instead of saying 'I.' To use the more self-centered 'I' is the right that may only be used when the king is disengaged from his responsibilities and knows that his actions will not affect the realm directly. So, too, the nobles must be aware that his or her behavior may affect the lives of other people and curb their self-centered reactions accordingly. Because your will is subservient to that of the king, you do not use we, you use I, to indicate that you are free of the need to be the ultimate will of the people. The morning following the tomb raid, Sard returned from wherever he had gone. Wendy thought he had been discussing the journey to Luffa with some of the Saurian scouts, but Tanner said that he had been to see their healers to have a scar or something removed from his chest. Wendy did not remember Sard having been wounded in the chest, and thought that it was strange that he would get it treated here instead of having to take care of it during one of their camps, but at least it seemed to put him in a good mood. While going to the weaponsmith to retrieve her sword, Wendy saw amongst the many sculptures in the Saurian homes the image of a tree bearing many different fruits, just like the ones she had found in the woods so long ago. Shisa later told her that this was a Saurian symbol for the mind and represented the many achievements that a well-trained mind could expect to pursue. She continued to find beauty and ingenuity in the Valley of the Saurians. They practiced gardening and the growing of plants just for their beauty. There were canals and ditches, shaped and placed where they would both look lovely and serve a function. The Saurian-made pools, placed to reflect sculptures or flowering trees, dotted the village. Twice she saw the village leatherworker giving her dark looks. Shisa told her that not all Saurians forgave the humans for the loss of old Soshar. She would be safe enough, but do not expect the hospitality of every Saurian to be equal. Filio and Celio and Smoke found Saurian wine to be to their liking, and spent much of their time tasting the local vintages, along with such baked goods and other treats that they could find to sample. Tanner's friends Stobart and Terrell somehow always avoided Wendy and would look at her with mistrust on the few occasions that they were all together. Little Midgie often followed Wendy around, and the Saurians took to calling her Lady Midgie, the shadow of Lady Spoven. Midgie liked the sound of it and started calling herself Lady Midgie and wearing a fine scarf she had found somewhere. One afternoon, Wendy came on a desperate scene as several Saurians were restraining Tennard from using a magic circle he had drawn. "What is happening here?" Wendy demanded. "He is my friend. Why are you holding him like that?" A Saurian pulled up Tennard's left sleeve and showed Wendy how blistered and swollen his arm was. "Tennard," admonished Wendy, "how long have you been trying to contact your school?" "I must reach my family," Tennard blurted out. "They must know of the disaster, and I must know that they are unharmed." Wendy tried to place herself in the mindset that Shisa had been teaching her. "Tennard, mage of Hastar College," Wendy addressed him. "You who brag of following the path of wisdom. Your family are all important members of the school. I think that the masters are wise and powerful enough to see to their well-being, don't you?" "But my brother, my mother," began Tennard. "Are your fathers concerned just now?" finished Wendy for him. "I believe that he will need to be free of worry about you hurting yourself while he keeps them safe. There are friends of Hastar College elsewhere, are there not?" Tennard looked embarrassed and replied, "Well, yes, of course there are. The masters have probably sent many of the students to other schools for safety. I should contact the Solar Eye College in Tuden and inquire there." "You had better see a healer first and get your arm seen to, Tennard," when he scolded him like an older sister, although Tennard was 4 years her senior. 2 Circean soldiers came to see what the disturbance was. They had been arguing between themselves as to whether Saurians were naturally right or left-handed. The eldest of the Saurian group laughed. "Why would we favor one hand over the other?" he inquired. "While one might prefer the use of one hand for a given task, we can use either hand equally well." Wendy was amazed and curious. What else did the Saurian do differently from humans? It was later in the day when Wendy happened upon Leo talking intently with one of the Saurian leaders. His hair had fallen back, revealing graceful, pointed ears. He was an elf! Leo noticed her stare and smiled disarmingly while gesturing for her to approach. I must apologize for the deception, but my people have seldom been well received by your people, he said. Please let me introduce myself properly. I am Arundel, an outcast of the Elven Kingdom, but not an enemy. Wendy found that she was not as shocked as she might have been. She had met too many extraordinary beings already. I am pleased to meet you, Arundel, she said with a bow. I am Lady Spoven, so I guess I have been traveling in disguise as well. They both laughed and found themselves becoming friends. The following day, Shisa was instructing Wendy on the Saurian culture and the philosophy of unity all source. There is no beginning to our story. The cosmos, as we know it, is one of an infinite cycle of collapse and renewal. From each reemergence, the first thing to come into being is neither energy nor matter, but pattern. This pattern must go through a series of trial and error to become a pattern that we might call mind. Not intelligent as we know it, just mind, capable of absorbing and processing other patterns. The one principle in operation at this stage is create or dissolve. The one primordial mind went through countless combinations before creating the laws of the cosmos which we are led to discover. Only then could it create time, energy, and matter. All these things have their being within the one primordial mind. Also, what we know as space is created at this point. Space is dependent on matter and cannot exist without the balance of matter. Matter, as we know it, is dependent on energy and cannot exist without it. Energy is, of course, dependent on mind and cannot exist in its absence. All the manifestations of the cosmos which are ultimately expressions of the One. Wendy's mind reeled, trying to comprehend it all. Eventually, the One Mind created appendages of itself to animate matter and energy, ultimately become beings. Simpler beings at first, then trial and interaction between the beings begat more and more complex entities, which led to beings which were sentient. Death is the process of recycling these entities into more complex forms as the process moves forward. All such beings are still part of the one primordial mind. We are an appendage so divided and contending amongst ourselves that we are in constant danger of self-destruction. Yet we remain connected and interdependent. Thus we retain the possibility of growth and progress. Love is the binding agent which allows us to avoid disintegration. Love? Queried Wendy. Oh, not courtly love or romance, Sisha replied with a smile. The love a being feels for other beings, especially their own kind. He resumed. The one mind is infinitely creative and instantly produces anything that has a strong enough mental reality in its appendages. Deities were created in this way. When primordial beings, at least in the case of we here, express the need for deity in significant numbers and sincerity, they come into being, an automatic response by the one primordial mind. Please note that this refers to the popular expression or belief, because we here in Soshire believe in magic. Magic is a reality. In a place where the popular belief prohibited magic, magic would not exist, even if a few passionately believed in it. It was because of this ideal that the Saurian race began to further their own civilization and abandon the violence that had marked them when they were mere lizard men. But I thought that Saurians believed in Shomena, interjected Wendy. Is he not real to you? Shomena is an expression of the one mind because we need guidance until we are more perfected than we are now, Sisha responded. He is as real as we are, and as a direct expression of the one deserves our reverence and obedience. What about the one true God of my own people? Inquired Wendy. He is likewise an expression of the one, and is the one and only such expression for those beings for whom he is the spiritual answer, said Shisa. So all gods are just expressions of the one? It seems so uncomfortable. All beings we have shared this with are uncomfortable with it at first, Shisa responded. The simpler seeming world of many gods, or a distant god and surface realities, is comforting to those who need simple reasons for everything. But once you comprehend the basic logic of it, it is the simplest description that encompasses all that we know of our world. The gods are real because we are real and we need gods. It's just that basic. It leaves me feeling unprotected and fragile, said Wendy. It should not. No one being is ever lost. They cannot be, for they are an expression of the one, Sisha said. The individual does not vanish just because they have a common source. Indeed, they are far more indestructible because they are one with the source of all things. Yet the gods are all so different, and often are at war with one another, said Wendy. They war on one another and deny one another because we war on one another and deny one another, said Shisa. They come to us as similar enough beings that we may know them, yet somehow better so that we may become better. In effect, our own actions are reflected back to us, to the gods, so that we may know ourselves. Later, as they walked through the flower trees by a small lake, Wendy had a chance to talk with Commander Hewlett about her uncle Randon. So much she wanted to learn, and here was someone who knew him as a person. You said that he came to do battle. How did he find this place? One of his scouts caught sight of our messenger returning from Luffa and somehow shadowed him through the caverns, he said. He had been misled by a noble from Bokenshire and believed that we were plotting against their king. I convinced him that we were far more concerned with the restoration of our ancestral rights than conquest. He believed you? He is a very honorable man, given to fairness and reason. So you talked, and he understood. Well, I had to let him attack me first. What? Once he realized that I was not fighting back, he opened his ears and listened to my story, and let me show him the evidence and the Book of Mud. The Book of Mud, replied Wendy. That is the book the Green Book quoted. Tennant is hoping to get information from it. Easy enough. We'll get him a copy. I'm sure the king will consent to it. The look on Tennant's face when Hewlett presented him with his very own copy of the legendary Book of Mud was almost worth the whole trip. The young man fairly drooled over pages of unknown Saurian magic and planetary observations. He quickly expressed his thanks and became immersed in the large tome, saying little more of the others until it was time to leave. Looking over his shoulder, Wendy was frustrated as she could only see odd angular marks on the pages and could not read anything. She would later point out that the book was written in the Saurian tongue and not the Mandarian that Wendy knew. Tennant was using a spell which allowed him to read the book. The fighting men would find the valley particularly hard to say goodbye to. It was comfortable, peaceful, and most Saurians were very friendly. They agreed that this would be an ideal place to retire to when they were too old to fight anymore. Arundel continues. Once we found the entrance to Sharo, the Saurians captured us and blindfolded each member of our party. I had never actually been to Sharo, but my father had, and I knew what to expect. Saurians are intelligent and fair, and they would do us no harm and might be allies, but they would protect their own at any cost. As we passed through the caves leading to the Saurian Valley, I tried to keep a sense of direction and depth, but I am no good at such things. Finally, we arrived at Sharo Valley and the land of the Saurian people. Still, I attempted to remain in disguise, but the Saurians are sharp-eyed, and they quickly recognized me. Although the girl still did not grasp what was meant until the following day. She walked up just as the Saurian advisor named Hisa and I were discussing Saurian and elf relations to humans and what could be done to improve them. I was not the only one unmasked by the Saurians. Heket revealed that this Wendy was in fact Lady Spoven, a lost noble from a formerly powerful Tauran noble house. Perhaps that is why she was able to accomplish so much. She told me that she had the proof of the crime wherein General Lord Thalen of Dresden House was innocent of any involvement in the murder of King Leopold, and General Napier, later King Napier, was in fact the murderer. This was not news to the Elven Kingdom, of course, but it was interesting that she had what the human kingdoms would accept as proof. This must be what I was sent here to protect. While we were there, news came that the snow giants were sending trolls through to attack Tor. This was bad news, as the snow giants had wanted to take over Shosher ever since their ancestors, the frost giants, died out. The snow giants had gotten it into their heads that humans were the cause of the frost giants' demise. They were almost certainly preparing to invade, nor would they easily be dissuaded or turned aside. They would destroy the human cities and any other civilized people who got in their way. With the news of Riston City's destruction, we were all concerned for the future of Shosher. Heket, quite understandably, felt that they needed to get this group to Luffa as soon as they could. I accompanied all the way to Luna City in Luffa. Imagine me going willingly to a major human city. I was, of course, exceptionally nervous. All these humans, and me without even a horse. They were a very unruly lot, jostling and pushing each other to see the Saurian representatives and the human heroes. I kept up my hood to protect myself. Once we arrived at the palace of King Thorel, my disguise was no more. Too many clever people, too close together. So I threw back my hood and waited to see what would happen. When asked, I said honestly that I was not part of the Elven Kingdom. They asked me to represent the Elven Kingdom anyway, as the only elf present. What does one do? Humans are the craziest kind of people.